The history of the Ottoman Empire is a vast tapestry, woven with threads of glory, conquest, and culture, but also with blood, fear, and cruelty. It was an empire that lasted for more than 6 centuries, stretching across 3 continents, where sultans ruled with absolute power, and the shadow of justice could be both divine and dreadful, within its grand palaces and sprawling provinces. The Ottomans built not just cities and armies, but a system of control that demanded obedience and punished disobedience with merciless precision, while its art, architecture, and science still inspire admiration. There existed another face of the empire, one that thrived on the language of terror. In an age where rebellion was a threat to divine order, punishment was more than a tool of justice. It was theater, designed to etch fear into the minds of thousands. Every act of brutality was not only a sentence, it was a spectacle meant to remind the living who held the power to decide between life and death. Let us descend now into the darker corridors of Ottoman history and uncover the methods through which the empire kept its subjects in awe and silence, gouging the darkness within among the many horrors that marked Ottoman justice. A gouging stood out not merely for its cruelty, but for its symbolism. To be blinded was to be erased, to be stripped of identity, condemned to eternal night. This punishment was most often reserved for traitors, spies, and those who dared to challenge the authority of the Sultan. In a world where loyalty was sacred and treason unforgivable, losing one's eyes was seen as a fitting penalty. The act itself was both ritual and warning. Evliya Çelebi, the 17th century Ottoman traveler, described scenes that chilled even hardened hearts. In open squares, before assembled crowds, the condemned would be restrained, their cries drowned out by the murmurs of spectators and the chanting of guards. Sharp iron instruments, sometimes heated, were pressed into service. In a single, horrifying moment, light would vanish forever. It was not death, but something crueler, a living curse. To walk blind through the streets of Istanbul, guided by another's hand, was a fate that evoked both pity and terror. People turned away, whispering prayers under their breath in the empire's unspoken code. Sight was a symbol of insight, of divine favor, and to lose it was to be marked as one who had seen too much, one who had betrayed the gaze of the Sultan himself. For the rulers, this punishment had a political beauty to it. It silenced rebellion without creating a martyr. The body lived, but the spirit was broken. The darkness in their eyes became a mirror of the empire's iron law. See nothing, speak nothing, betray nothing. Beheadings. The swift end of defiance if eye gouging was a slow descent into darkness. Beheading was its swift, merciless counterpart, the empire's ultimate statement of authority. Few punishments were as theatrical or as public as this one. Beheadings were the crown jewel of Ottoman execution rituals, clean, decisive, and symbolic, for acts of betrayal, rebellion, or defiance against the Sultan. The head itself became the price of disobedience. The execution ground, often a public square or a field outside the city walls, would fill with spectators. The condemned was paraded before the people, his name announced by a crier, his crimes recited like a sermon. The silence that followed was heavy, a silence that only the fall of a blade could break. A single stroke from a curved sword, and the body collapsed, often still twitching, as the head rolled into the sand. The crowd gasped, then murmured. Some prayed, others cheered. To the Ottomans, beheading was not savagery, it was law. It was the empire's promise that order would be restored, no matter the cost. Among the most infamous of these executions was that of Sheikh Bedreddin, a scholar turned rebel whose dream of equality clashed with the Sultan's authority. Bedreddin, once a judge under the Ottoman system, began preaching against the growing divide between rich and poor. His words ignited a flame among peasants, soldiers, and dispossessed believers who longed for justice. The rebellion he led, though brief, shook the empire to its core. When Bedreddin was finally captured, He was brought before Sultan Mehmed I. His defiance did not waver. Even as his sentence was pronounced, he remained silent, eyes fixed on the horizon, the same horizon his ideas had hoped to free. His execution took place in where a crowd gathered under the scorching sun. The sword flashed once, and the rebellion died with him. His head, carried through the streets, was a message. The empire suffers no dreamers of equality. After battles, Ottoman soldiers would often decapitate enemy leaders or deserters, mounting their heads on pikes or sending them to the capital as proof of triumph. The sight of a pyramid of severed heads outside the city gates became an image burned into the psyche of the empire. It was not merely vengeance. It was propaganda, the empire's silent language of terror. The power of the Sultan was absolute, and every head that rolled served as a grim punctuation to that truth. Falaka, pain beneath the feet. Not every punishment drew blood or ended life. Some were designed to humiliate, to inflict pain so intense that death would seem a mercy, yet without the visible scars that might invite pity. Among these was the falaka, the infamous foot-beating punishment that echoed across centuries of Ottoman life. It was used on soldiers, servants, students, and slaves, a universal weapon of discipline. The condemned was tied down, often by several guards, with their bare feet exposed. Then, using rods or thick sticks, the executioners struck the souls again and again until the victims' cries turned hoarse, and their flesh swelled and bruised at first glance. The falaka might seem almost trivial compared to beheading or impalement, but those who endured it described pain so excruciating that even hardened warriors wept. The soles of the feet, filled with nerve endings, could feel agony long after the beating ended. Victims sometimes couldn't walk for days or weeks, crawling instead of standing, their pride shattered as much as their bodies. What made this punishment particularly cruel was its subtlety. The body bore no permanent marks, allowing the victim to heal physically while carrying the memory of pain forever. In Ottoman schools, the falaka was a disciplinary tool. For minor misdeeds, students were struck with measured blows. For greater defiance, the beatings were in the military, it kept soldiers obedient, reminding them that the empire's reach extended even to their feet. For the Ottomans, it was not always death that controlled men, it was the fear of pain, the knowledge that one's body could be made to betray them. Hanging, the weight of guilt where beheading was a moment of spectacle. Hanging was a sentence of endurance, a slow strangulation of life, where death crept inch by inch. Used for crimes like murder, theft, or rebellion, hanging was often carried out in bustling public spaces, bridges, market squares, or the gates of cities. The condemned was led through the crowd, hands bound, head bowed beneath the noose that awaited him. The rope hung like fate itself, rough, silent, and final. When the moment came, a hush fell. The executioner adjusted the knot, and with a single motion, the condemned was lifted into the air. Some died quickly. Others twisted and convulsed, gasping for breath as the crowd watched in uneasy silence. In certain cases, the Ottomans employed variations that deepened the cruelty, hooks driven through ribs, or long poles used to suspend the body like a warning banner. The victim might remain hanging for hours, sometimes days, until the corpse itself became a symbol of law. The public display of hangings was as important as the act itself. For the empire, justice was not hidden behind walls. It was displayed, announced, and remembered. To see a man's body swinging in the wind was to see the Sultan's command given flesh. It was a grim reminder that in the Ottoman world, sin and justice were inseparable, and mercy was not always a virtue. Some chroniclers describe how markets continued as bodies hung nearby, the scent of spices mixing with that of death, a chilling coexistence that reflected the empire's paradox, civilization and cruelty, side by side. Amputation, the price of theft, in a realm where honor and property were sacred. Theft was not just a crime, it was blasphemy against order itself. And for such transgressions, the Ottomans often turned to a punishment as brutal as it was symbolic: amputation. The most common form involved the cutting off of hands or feet, depending on the crime. For a thief, the loss of a hand was a permanent mark, a visible confession of guilt carved into the body. The amputation took place publicly, often before the eyes of those whose goods had been stolen, and always under the supervision of imperial guards. A sharp blade, a single stroke, and the hand was gone. The bleeding stump was then cauterized, sometimes with hot oil, to stop the blood and prevent infection. But for the condemned, the agony was not only physical. To live without a hand in Ottoman society was to live as a warning, a reminder to others that justice, like the Sultan's power, was swift and irreversible. There were times when amputations served political purposes. Rebels and deserters might lose feet instead of lives, a punishment that ensured they could never rise against the empire again. The act was both mutilation and control. It broke the will, while preserving the body as a living example. In the bazaars and streets of Istanbul, people sometimes whispered of men with missing limbs who begged for mercy, ghosts of justice walking among the living. To see them was to remember the law, and the hand that once reached for what was forbidden. Amputation, in its essence, was not about killing, it was about marking. It created human monuments of fear. The punishments we have seen so far, the blinding, the beheading, the hangings, and the amputations, each revealed a facet of Ottoman justice: the need for obedience, the worship of order, the fear that held the empire together. But beyond these lay the punishments that even seasoned soldiers whispered about in hushed tones, acts not just of discipline, but of terror. These were punishments that stripped men of everything, not just their freedom, but their humanity. Punishments that left bodies shattered and souls hollow. In the eyes of the empire, they were necessary evils, a way to control millions through the suffering of a few. But to those who endured them, they were the very edge of hell. Let us walk deeper now, through the shadows of Ottoman cruelty, where pain became policy, and terror became law. Emasculation, the death of manhoods in the empire's most secretive corners. Far from the public squares, where beheadings took place, there existed a punishment that was rarely spoken of, yet known by all. Emasculation, the brutal removal of a man's genitals, was one of the most feared sentences in Ottoman history. This punishment was not reserved for petty crimes. It was inflicted upon those who defied the Sultan in the most personal of ways: betrayers, conspirators, and sometimes those who violated the sanctity of the palace itself. In a society where masculinity was synonymous with honor and lineage with immortality, emasculation was more than mutilation, it was annihilation. To strip a man of his ability to father children was to erase his name from history. It was the empire's way of saying, "You shall not live," even in memory. Some accounts suggest that emasculation was used as both punishment and transformation. The creation of eunuchs, men castrated to serve in the imperial palace, was not always voluntary. While many eunuchs were taken as slaves from conquered lands, there were instances where criminals were spared execution only to face this living death. They would serve in silence, their loyalty secured by the very mutilation that destroyed their former selves. Within the palace walls, these eunuchs often rose to positions of great trust, guarding the Sultan's harem and managing affairs of state. Yet behind their composure lay a horror, unspoken, the price of survival, carved in flesh. In some cases, emasculation was carried out as punishment for sexual crimes. For those who violated women of noble blood, or who dared to approach the Sultan's concubines, death was considered too lenient. The body had to pay in kind. Victims of this act rarely lived long, for infection and blood loss were almost certain. But for those who did, life became a torment of whispers and stares. In Ottoman culture, a man's virility defined his status, and without it, He was neither man nor servant, only a living symbol of disgrace. Even in its silence, emasculation spoke louder than execution. It said, "The Sultan owns not only your body, but your very nature." It was not merely punishment, it was domination in its purest, most horrifying form. Impalement, the empire's darkest sentence. If emasculation killed the spirit, impalement destroyed the body, slowly, methodically, and with unbearable precision. It was the punishment that marked the absolute bottom of Ottoman cruelty, the act that turned death into spectacle and agony into art. Impalement was reserved for the worst of crimes: rebellion, treason, and murder against authority. It was not just an execution, it was a performance, one designed to linger in memory long after the victim was gone. The process began with the preparation of the stake, a long, sharpened pole, sometimes greased to prolong suffering. The condemned was stripped naked and bound, their cries echoing across the field. The stake was then forced through the body, usually through the rectum or abdomen, with such care that vital organs were avoided, ensuring the victim lived as long as possible. The pole would then be raised upright, leaving the body suspended, writhing in unspeakable torment. Death did not come quickly. It could take hours. Sometimes, it took days. Witnesses described scenes that defy comprehension, victims still breathing as birds landed on their shoulders, or as flies gathered on open wounds. The human body, impaled from end to end, became a grotesque flag of empire, fluttering in the wind, an emblem of the Sultan's wrath. While this method is often associated with Vlad the infamous Wallachian prince who terrorized both Ottomans and Europeans alike, it was not foreign to Ottoman punishment. The empire adopted impalement as a tool of suppression, particularly in rebellious provinces. In places like the Balkans, Serbia, and Anatolia, captured rebels might find themselves facing this unholy punishment. Entire villages would be forced to watch as the condemned were lifted on stakes along the roads, their bodies forming a ghastly avenue of death. To travel such a road was to walk through silence, a silence made of fear, heavy as the air before a storm. Impalement was not just cruelty, it was policy. It worked because it left no room for misunderstanding. The message was clear: defy the empire, and you will die in agony so great that even the earth will remember. The theater of pain, public punishments, has power though. Ottoman Empire understood something that few powers of its time grasped so completely, that fear was a form of governance. Punishments were not merely to destroy the guilty. They were performances meant to instruct the innocent. The public square was the empire's stage. Each execution was a sermon in steel and blood. The crowd gathered not merely to watch, but to learn. Eye gouging taught the danger of betrayal. Beheading reminded all that rebellion had no mercy. Falaka showed that discipline reached even to the lowest ranks. Amputation taught that theft carried a visible price. Hanging whispered that crime had no hiding place. And impalement taught that the Sultan was not just a ruler, but a god of life and death. For the Ottomans, punishment was a sacred ritual. It reaffirmed divine order, the belief that justice flowed from the Sultan as God's chosen shadow on earth. To witness punishment was to witness power in motion. The cries of the condemned became a kind of prayer, the sound of justice being born through pain. But even in this darkness, contradictions thrived. The same empire that built magnificent mosques, sponsored poets, and preserved ancient learning, also perfected the art of execution. It was a civilization that could produce beauty and horror in the same breath, the call to prayer rising over the cries of the condemned. Historians often debate whether the Ottomans were crueler than their contemporaries, the Europeans, the Persians, or the Mongols. The truth is simpler. Cruelty, in that age, was universal, but the Ottomans refined it. They gave it ceremony. They made it part of the architecture of rule. The law of Firin, the heart of the empire. Where the Bosporus glistened beneath the domes of Istanbul, justice was seen as the backbone of power. Without it, the Sultan's authority would crumble. But Ottoman justice was not blind, it was watchful. It saw everything. The empire's legal system, rooted in both Sharia and Qanon imperial law, held that order must be maintained at all costs. Mercy existed, but only for those who submitted. To disobey was to invite punishment, not because the Sultan enjoyed cruelty, but because control demanded it. The punishments we've explored were the physical embodiment of that belief. They kept governors in line, soldiers disciplined, and peasants obedient. The empire did not survive for 600 years on diplomacy alone. It survived on fear, the kind of fear that made rebellion unthinkable. And yet, there was a strange justice in it all. Within the empire's brutality lay a brutal fairness. Crime had consequence, treachery had price, and no man, not even the Sultan's kin, was entirely above the law. History records princes blinded, governors executed, and viziers strangled with silk cords in the quiet chambers of the palace. Even those closest to power lived under the shadow of the bowstring, the price of power as centuries passed. The Ottoman Empire began to change. The age of grand conquest faded. The empire grew old, weighed down by bureaucracy and the ghosts of its own past. Western influence brought new ideas, law codes, reforms, and a growing discomfort with the blood-soaked rituals of justice that once defined Ottoman authority. By the 19th century, impalement and emasculation had vanished, replaced by imprisonment or exile. But the memory lingered, whispered in taverns, recorded in travelers' tales, hidden in the footnotes of historians. Even as modernity crept in, the shadow of the old punishments remained, a reminder of how the empire had once ruled through awe, obedience, and terror. And perhaps that is the truest reflection of all empires, that they are built not only on glory and achievement, but on fear, the silent fear that holds men in place when words no longer do. Echoes of the past today. When we look back upon the Ottoman Empire, we often see its splendor, the domes of the Hagia Sophia, the intricate calligraphy, the music of the court. But beneath that grandeur lay an understanding both ancient and cold. Power is nothing without consequence. The punishments we have explored are not just relics of cruelty. They are the echoes of a world where justice was inseparable from fear. They remind us that civilization and savagery often coexist, that the line between order and oppression is as thin as the blade that once gleamed in the sun. The Ottomans ruled an empire vast enough to touch 3 continents, but the empire that truly endured was the one they built in men's minds. A realm of obedience forged in terror and sustained by spectacle. To stand in those old squares today, where the cries have long faded, is to feel something still lingering, not the fear of punishment, but the weight of history itself, a whisper from the past that says, power always comes at a price. Conclusion: the Ottoman Empire was not the only civilization to use brutality as law, but few did it with such precision, purpose, and control. From the blinding of traitors to the impalement of rebels, from the falaka's sting to the silence of the noose, every punishment served a single master, the idea that fear could hold an empire together. It is easy to condemn such acts today, from the comfort of distance. Yet history reminds us that every empire, in its time, has its instruments of terror. The Ottomans simply understood theirs better than most. And as we close this journey into the empire's darkest corners, remember this: cruelty is never random. It is always designed. In the Ottoman world, it was designed to last, not just in body, but in memory. So when you next hear of the glories of the Sultan's courts, or the beauty of the call to prayer drifting across the Golden Horn, remember the shadows behind the splendor and the price that was paid to keep the empire standing. For in the end, history is not written only by the victors. It is also written in the cries of the condemned,